story. It's about a community that had everything, living by the sea, totally blessed. They were given just one single test of faith, a simple one. But what happens when people get a little too clever for their own good and try to find a loophole in a divine command? Well, as we're about to see, their smart idea led to the silent, absolutely terrifying punishment that, honestly, serves as a huge warning even for us today.
So, that brings us to the big, kind of shocking question, right? Why on earth did an entire community of people turn into apes? It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but the answer isn't some magic spell. No, it's found in how they handled a simple test, a test of obedience that went so wrong. So, our story starts in this thriving coastal town called Isla. These folks had it all, and they knew the rules got it set for them. But they also had this reputation for, let's say, finding creative ways around their promises. And that little habit of theirs was about to be put to the ultimate test.
The command itself couldn't have been clearer. Every Saturday, the Sabbath, was set aside for worship. That's it. No work, no business, and for a fishing town like Isla, absolutely no fishing. It was a really straightforward test of their priorities. Were they going to choose God, or were they going to choose profit? And this is where things get really interesting. This is where the struggle begins. Would the people of Isla choose to be patient and just trust? Or would they get cunning and try to outsmart the system? Because this test wasn't just a rule on a scroll. It came with a massive, almost unbearable temptation. And you have to understand, this test was almost cruelly designed. On the 6 days a week they could work, the fishing was awful, barely anything. But on Saturday, the one day they were forbidden to fish, the sea would come alive. It was overflowing with huge schools of fish, swimming right up to the shore, practically jumping out of the water. I mean, the temptation was just staring them in the face.
So faced with this, you can just imagine the whispers starting around town. They're not going to openly defy God. No, they're smarter than that. Instead, the thinking became, hey, we're not going to break the rule, we're just going to find a way around it. This was their first big step into some seriously calculated self-deception.
And their plan was, you have to admit, pretty ingenious. Here's what they did. On Friday, the day before the Sabbath, they dug these big channels from the sea leading inland and set up their nets. Then, on Saturday, the Sabbath, they did nothing. They just sat back while the tide came in, bringing all those fish right into their canals and their nets. The fish trapped themselves. Then, on Sunday morning, they'd just casually walk over and collect this massive haul. See, technically, they didn't lift a finger on the Sabbath.
But a clever plan like this doesn't just stay a plan. It has consequences. And this one didn't just challenge a divine rule. It completely tore their town apart. This single choice created a massive divide, turning neighbor against neighbor and splitting the entire community right down the middle.
So basically, the whole town fractured into 3 distinct groups. First, you had the sinners. These were the ones using the loophole, super proud of themselves, thinking, look how smart we are, we didn't even break the rule. Then you had the righteous. This was a smaller group, begging the others to stop, warning them that God's punishment was surely coming. And finally, you had the silent, the biggest group of all, who just watched it all happen and thought, hey, this isn't my problem. And so, the warnings from the righteous were totally ignored. The sinners got richer and richer, and the silent, well, they just stayed silent. But then, one night, after all the celebrating and self-congratulation, an unnatural quiet just fell over the town. The time for warnings was over. The consequence had arrived.
But here's the eeriest part. There was no giant storm, no thunder, no lightning. The sea, which was the source of their sin, didn't rise up against them. The earth didn't shake. The ground didn't split open. This punishment wasn't loud or destructive in that way. It came in a chilling, profound silence. And in that deafening silence, the command came down. It wasn't a shout from the heavens. It was more like a quiet echo through the air, sealing the fate of everyone who took part in the scheme and everyone who just stood by and let it happen. The next morning, the righteous people, who had walled themselves off for protection, looked out over their town, and it was a scene of pure horror. There were no people. The streets were just filled with apes, still wearing the tattered clothes of their human forms. And the story goes that relatives could recognize each other. The humans could see their transformed family among the apes, and the apes recognized them back, their eyes full of tears, but they couldn't speak. They only lived like that for 3 days before they all perished.
So what on earth does this ancient, terrifying story have to do with us today? Well, it's way more than just a cautionary tale about fishing. It's really a mirror, and it reflects a weakness for self-deception that is just as powerful in our world as it was back then.
You know, this specific crime actually has a name. It's called hilasazi. It's the art of using these clever tricks and legalistic loopholes to get around the spirit of a law while pretending you're obeying the letter of the law. It's about knowing something is wrong but finding a smart way to do it anyway.
Their loophole was about catching fish. Today, we see the exact same principle, just with different labels. We don't call it high-interest usury, we call it a profit-sharing plan. We don't call a bribe, we call it a gift. We don't call a lie, we call it a marketing technique. The words change, but the deception, the hilasazi at its core, is exactly the same.
And this really brings us to the ultimate lesson of the whole story. It's this powerful reminder that what really matters isn't how clever our words are or the loopholes we can find, it's about the intention in our hearts. It's not about what we say we're doing, but about why we're really doing it.
And so this whole story leaves us with a pretty challenging question for ourselves. Where in our own lives, in our work, in our dealings with people, are we using our cleverness not to solve problems, but to justify things we know deep down aren't right? Are we too getting lost in our own clever little loopholes? That's definitely something worth thinking about.